Well, there's a whole lot of shaking going on here in Japan, and it's not because of the funky rhythms that we're bringing you here on the Adult Music Podcast.
Yeah, this is serious earth-moving stuff.
Yeah, earth-moving is right. Well, we haven't had any earthquakes here in the Kansai area. Let me just knock on wood for that. But there have been 3 in Japan just in the last 24 hours. Really crazy.
Yeah, they talk about the big one being possible, but that's in the next 30 years or so.
Yeah.
Hopefully the predictions are nothing to worry about in the immediate future, though.
Yeah, because we'll be out of here within 30 years, right? Because that's what I said 30 years ago. But I'm still here.
I'm not going anywhere. I'll be staying here.
You're staying? I don't know. It's still up in the air for me. We'll have to see.
But I am going somewhere temporarily
for
the first time in a while. So just to let our regular listeners know, next week, August 19th, we will not have a regular episode. We'll be taking a week off. And we're going to try to put together a intercontinental episode while I'm away for a couple of weeks. And hopefully we'll get something together for the following week, August 26th.
Okay, but keep in mind, we might not, depending on how things go. So just keep your eyes peeled. Yes. And if nothing comes up 2 weeks from now, you'll know why.
Yeah. In the event that we're not able to, I will put something on Facebook just to notify.
I'll try to do that too. I'll try to get off my butt and put some classical music on Facebook because it's all jazz. Well, it's August and now the classical music releases have slowed down a bit, but in September they speed up. They start coming out again, so I'll probably have some stuff then. Right now, there's some off the beaten track stuff that's coming out that's pretty interesting, so maybe we'll try some of that. And we're doing some of that this week, so it's going to be a pretty interesting podcast today.
Anyway, you are listening to Adult Music, the podcast with music for the mature mind, and this is episode 177. I'm your co-host, Russ.
And I'm your co-host, Mike.
And this week we don't have any special thanks to give out. We don't have any deaths or other news to announce, so we can get right into the program. It's got a lot of variety this week, as always, bringing you 6 recent releases in classical and jazz music. This episode's going to be an interesting one. In the episode description, you can find links to Spotify, Apple Music, and Amazon Music for all the music that we'll discuss. And at the top of the description, there's a link to the full episode playlist. That's all the music in one place on Deezer, CD quality streaming music from France. You can catch the podcast there as well if you want to get everything in one place. Now, if you listen to us on one of the many apps that we're on, not all of them show the recording information links clearly, and if you have a problem accessing anything, you can always come over to our host site. That's Podbean, PODBEAN.com, where everything is clear and easy to follow. If you enjoy the podcast, please follow us, subscribe wherever you listen to us, and tell a music-loving friend as well. If you take a moment to give us a ranking or write a review, that also helps us get listed in the music category recommendations, another way we can get new listeners. Come over and follow us on our Facebook page as well to get extra info, more new releases throughout the week, see our interaction with the artists, and see our handsome faces over there. You can leave a comment or a message there as well. And if you'd like to contact us directly with any comments or questions, we'd love to hear from you. Our email address is adultmusicpodcast, all one word, @gmail.com. We'll be playing samples of the musical recordings we're talking about tonight, and this is our fair use disclaimer. Music sample clips are for commentary and educational purposes. We recommend that listeners listen to the complete recordings, all of which are available on streaming services in the links provided. And we also suggest that if you enjoy the music, you consider purchasing the CDs or high-quality downloads to support the artists. All that out of the way, what's on the menu tonight in classical, Mike?
All right, this is amazing. We're just going to get right into it. Our first recording really, speaking of shaking going on, our first recording made quite an impression on me. It's called Basso Profundo. Great title, by the way. And this is by Edwin Barker playing the double bass, the solo double bass, that is. He's an American double bass player, and he's been the principal bass of the Boston Symphonie-Orchestra since he was 22 years old, and he's held that position for nearly 50 years.
Amazing.
Not bad. That's a pretty good life. This is on the Navona Records label, and it was released on July 26th. In fact, we're going to hear Navona Records again. This album is quite the sonic spectacular, despite the fact that it has only one instrument. It kind of sounds like it was recorded, like your seat would be inside the instrument, because it just feels like the entire room is shaking when he gets down low on this instrument. Now, the two works that are on the album, they're two solo suites. First, we get the Johann Sebastian Bach Cello Suite number 5 in C minor. Is that the original key? I don't know. Anyway, this is BWV 1011. And then after that, we get a 20th century work by Mstislav Weinberg, who's become very popular lately. He was a Soviet composer, originally from Poland. And this is his Sonata, Opus 108 for double bass. Let's start talking about this, and especially let's start playing these samples. You're not going to believe the sound on this album. And unfortunately, we're playing it in mono, but it's still going to come out. You can sample it via the link that we provide. Anyway, first we hear the Bach Suite number 5 in C minor, originally for the cello, here for the double bass. The difficulty of playing this piece, according to Barker, oh, by the way, Barker is the arranger of this piece too. Okay, he's arranged it for the double bass. He says the difficulty of playing this piece on the double bass is that basses are usually tuned in fourths, whereas cellos are tuned in fifths. So Barker personally thinks of this piece as his Everest. And Everest is kind of an interesting way to think of it, not just because it's just this pinnacle, this, challenge to be met, but also because of its just giganticness, because we get this gigantic tone on this album throughout. The first movement, track 1, is the prelude, and the first tone from the double bass comes booming out of the speakers. This is going to blow you away. It sounds like an oversized version of the Bach Cello Suite. It's like Godzilla's playing the cello, really, or like, his version of the cello, and it's just like shaking the whole town. It's a real shock. Check this opening out. This is amazing. Yeah, that had my stomach rumbling, I gotta tell you. Those low bass notes really burst out of the speakers. Beyond that, Barker plays the melodies with wonderful lyricism, the double bass not sounding unwieldy at all in this music. At around the 2 minute and 20 second mark, a fugal section starts, and here Barker has an impressively lively rhythm, keeping all the voices clear at what is a relatively fast speed. The richness of tone throughout is impressive, particularly, as you heard, in the low end. Track 2 is the Allemande. The opening 16th note burst is underplayed here a bit. It doesn't really come out like it did in the prelude, but that's just as well. I mean, how much of this do we need? We need variety. It doesn't come exploding on, and that's a good thing. We get a good sense of the lyricism of the playing, Barker keeping his arrangement more or less in the instrument's mid-range, and going a bit lighter on the bass notes here. He sets a good tempo and gets some beautiful, sensitive sound on his double-stopped chords, lightening a bit on them to give them a tapering quality. Track 3, the Courante, also has a light opening, and I like the smoothness and suaveness with which the opening is put across, and I'd like to sample that. This gives a bit of a contrast to what the opening sounds like of the first movement. And we get a repeat of that opening. Track 4, Sarabande. The Sarabande opens with a light tone and sensitive touch. This is also on the faster side for a Sarabande. Barker keeps the 4 opening phrase lines connected as a group, and Bach makes sure that the work doesn't stay that way with an answering phrase that's longer. without pauses. Okay, listen to this. I'm just going to sample this one too. We start hearing those opening phrases again there. The quickish tempo rather takes some of the poetry away from me. I kind of felt like in between those opening lines and then it gets sort of repeated, it would have been nicer if that space was a little longer, just to have a little bit of a time to contemplate what we're hearing. But we come away with a clear sense of the work's form, and really the timbre is so fascinating that you wind up glued to the performance anyway. Track 5, Gavotte 1 and 2, the first gavotte is given a heavy downbeat and a smooth continuation of the line. We're reminded at the beginning of phrases that this is a gavotte, but it tends to sing more than dance. The second gavotte begins at around 2 minutes and 35 seconds and has more of a whirling quality to it. Barker again plays with impressive legato here, really with the facility one would hear on a cello, and I find that remarkable. Gavotte 1 comes back at the end with a bit more energy in its step than the first time we heard it. Track 6 is the jig, and I like the energy this jig is given. Let's sample it. It's simultaneously dance-like and lyrical. I have to say, after listening to the entire 6 movements on the double bass, I think my chest cavity has been cleared of any blockage by the sound coming out of my speakers. This recording is really having an effect on my nervous system, and I suppose it's a good one. Bach can only have a good effect on you, can it? The piece ends with a satisfyingly reverberant low note, and then we get to tracks 7 through 12, the 20th century work by Mstislav Weinberg, Sonata Opus 108 for solo double bass. There's no key for this. Weinberg was born in Warsaw and studied at the Warsaw Conservatory, but in 1941 his family was captured and killed by the Third Reich. He fled to Minsk and settled eventually in Moscow, where he became friends with Dmitry Shostakovich. In the Soviet Union, Weinberg suffered further anti-Semitism despite Shostakovich's support, and was briefly imprisoned for anti-Soviet activities, as all seemingly good composers in the Soviet Union were during this era. We heard an ECM recording of Gidon Kremer play some of Weinberg's sonatas for solo violin on episode 86 from Pole to Pole back on October 24th, 2022, and that set me up for a fearsome listen. Those were difficult, edgy works. This one is not, and it's also the only sonata for double bass that Weinberg wrote. He wrote many for the violin, or at least 4. This double bass sonata is more expansive and sweet-like than any of Weinberg's other solo instrument suites. Thank goodness for that. It's primarily dark, but not humorless, or dour, or as the British would say, dour. Barker describes the music as nobility that finds its way out of darkness. And I like that. I like to think that we are nobility who will eventually find our way out of darkness. Let's follow Weinberg's lead here. Track 7 is the first movement, Adagio. We're not in the Baroque era anymore, Toto, is what I wrote here. This starts out with a slight aggression to it, with upward moving lines, then a repeated sawed set of double stops that sounds a bit like a hee-hawing donkey. Let's listen to it and see if you can hear what I mean. So we get our themes there. Weinberg makes sure we're hearing a double bass here, giving us some low reverberant notes along with more melodious sections. Remember, this piece is originally for double bass. The piece does have some lyricism to it. It's also got quite a bit of energy as well. For the lyricism, listen to the section starting around 1 minute and 45 seconds. It slows down toward the end, winding up back at the opening rising arpeggio gestures, and then giving us the 2 double-stop sounds very low on the instrument. Track 8 is marked Allegretto. This is the second movement of 6. There's a kind of exciting quality to the opening of this movement. Let's hear that. I really like conjunct legato harmonies on the double bass and on the cello too, as you just heard at the end of that sample. This piece sounds like it's up to some mischief with its quick staccato lines and notes. Melodically, the music loses some energy as it goes, but then finds a gliding line at the beginning of the second minute and brings us back to the opening section toward the end. The ending sort of peters out before it reaches any kind of resolution. Track 9, the third movement, Moderato. This sets a strong rhythmic profile deep on the instrument. The double bass impacts heavily on the body as well as the ears. Yeah, my body's like being beaten up by this recording. I'm not listening to it in headphones. I am now, but when I heard it for the first time, I heard it through column speakers. You really sense the sound almost rubbing against you as it comes out of the stereo. A lighter section follows, crescendoing back to something more urgent, then to the opening. The thumps on the chords at the end of the movement are powerful. Track 10, the fourth movement, Allegretto. This is sort of brief at 1 minute and 28 seconds and has sort of a folk song quality to its sequenced melody. The middle section is played pizzicato, the first time we're hearing a section like this on the album. Again, it impacts well, the opening theme repeats, and then we're off to track 11, the fifth movement, Lento. This starts lyrically with beautiful legato playing and powerful tone. Let's sample the opening. The music becomes a bit more outspoken with double-stopped chords that lead to further melodic phrases on the instrument at the end. The very last chords of the work are deep in the profundo area of the bass and come across with rumbling power. Track 12, the final track and the final movement, which is the sixth movement, is marked Allegro molto, and this is kind of a quirky dance. The tone dances between lower and middle registers as it goes. Let's sample it. So I hear a bit of humor at the beginning of that. The dance seems to work as a rondo theme between more spacious but still quirky departure sections. Weinberg uses that back and forth hee-hawing donkey double-stop set of chords in this piece too. At 2 minutes there's some mysterious playing in the low end of the bass, and then we hear the opening theme again, altered tonally and rhythmically this time, but it's identifiable. I liked the pretty wavering line at 3 minutes and 25 seconds that begins a slower section. The work ends rather undramatically, petering out on a quiet final double-stopped chord. Basso Profundo is a title that really sums up the sound we get on this album. It's got some really impressive playing on it. I thought the Weinberg work was the more successful, and I'm sure that's because it was specifically written for this instrument. But the Bach suite works surprisingly well on the double bass, particularly in Barker's hands. Also, you get a sense of full dimensionality in the sound. So I'd like to give a shout out to the session engineer Christopher Moretti and session producer Jesse Lewis, as well as the mastering skills of Jesse Lewis and Shauna Baravecchio for a fully dimensional recording. I should also mention the audio director Lucas Paquette. It seems that a lot of attention was given to the sound quality of the recording, and if so, it was well worth the effort. It actually made my stomach rumble when the bass played in its lowest register. The recording is fantastic. Barker is extremely empathetic with the Weinberg work, which was specifically written for his instrument. He seems to relish the deep tone of his instrument, putting it across powerfully in the sonata, as well as in the Bach. This one is definitely for fans of the lower tones of the orchestra. They're very good performances too. The Bach is fascinating in this arrangement and very well played, but I'd single out the Weinberg as an especially satisfying performance.
Barker really makes the bass sing out on the Bach cello suite. It was really interesting hearing these deep tones instead of the sound of the cello, which I normally love anyway. But this was just sort of on like a low-frequency steroid injection. It was kind of fun. And the Weinberg was not as out there as I was expecting, having heard other pieces of his music.
Right.
He did a fine job here of making it very musical, and he brought out the logic and humor in the piece, and I enjoyed that a lot. This piece sounds really demanding, moving quickly between registers of the big instrument, but his performance really held my interest and kept me drawn into the piece wondering what was coming next. It's a piece that has a lot of anticipation and then payoffs in it. So the musicality here on that big bass instrument was outstanding, and as you said, the recording quality is something else too. So definitely put out your big speakers and your subwoofer for this one and sit back and enjoy those chest-thumping bass lines.
Yeah, and watch your heart rate, too. Boy. All right, our second album is one I've been sort of holding on to for a while because it's fairly long, and also I needed to do some research into this. It's called Turkish Flavours, 100 Years of Turkish Symphonic Music. And this is by the Deutsches Symphonie-Orchester Berlin, conducted by Howard Griffiths, on the Prospero classical label. This is a label that's new to us on the podcast. And this came out way back on June 7th, 2024. All right, now, Howard Griffiths' interest in Turkish orchestral music started when he married a Turkish violist and lived in Ankara for almost 10 years. Turkey, or as I've been advised to call it, Türkiye, really entered the Western classical music scene with the foundation of the Ankara Conservatory in 1936, at the instigation of Kemal Atatürk. Paul Hindemith was invited to lay down the curriculum. All right, now, I have to do some pronunciation of Turkish here, and I need to give some thank yous first. First of all, my good friend Ebru Su sent me a recording of her pronouncing the names on the album. And then I had a really interesting experience of serendipity where I went out to a local coffee shop and met, just by chance, a researcher over at Kyoto University, and his name is Yalçın Pusil, and he turns out to be Turkish, and he sat down with me and went through a lot of these presentations as well. It was just a really weird thing, so that just told me we have to do this album. Now, the thing is, despite the fact that I had all his help with the Turkish pronunciations, I'm still going to probably get all of them wrong. So anyway, let's try. Now, there are 5 composers that are known as the Turkish Five, and they're all on this album. The most popular composers from Turkey, or Türkiye. I have to say something. The official name of the country is now Türkiye with the E with the umlaut at the end. But if you speak English, you don't have an umlaut in your language, so we're still going to want to say Turkey. It's kind of they should have had a non-umlaut name there. But anyway, let's try to do this right. Türkiye. Okay? The 5 composers known as the Turkish Five are Ahmet Adnan Saygun, Cemal Reşit Rey, Ulvi Cemal Erkin, Necil Kazum Akses, and Ferit Tuzun. All of their music is featured on this album. They all look to Europe, especially to Germany and France, for their inspiration, but many of Turkey's later composers look back to their roots through the eyes of Western symphonic music, and we will hear that as the album goes on. The main contrast to Western music lies in the use of aksak rhythms, which are irregular rhythms, and the use of makams, scales which are very different to those in Western music. We've heard them in North African music and in like Middle Eastern jazz, too. We hear a lot of these types of modes. We can call them modes. We can call them Arab, or in this case, Turkish modes. Okay, let's start with Turkish 5. Track 1. The composer is Ahmet Adnan Saygun, and this piece is called Ayun Raksu, Opus 57, which means ritual dance. It was composed in 1975. Saygun lived 1907 to 1991. He was friends with Bartók, and is one of the 5 pioneers of Western classical music in Turkey, as I mentioned. He recorded many folk songs and melodies. Being friends with Bartók, that's what you would do. In his compositions, he gradually merged the sophistication of the French Impressionists with the national heritage of Turkish music, and the melody is based on a makam. The piece has a pretty intriguing opening, and you can hear the French influence in it, as well as the modal quality of the melodic lines. The piece sort of progresses with staccato lines. Griffiths, as conductor, is careful to leave space so that we can catch every bit of the orchestration, and some of it is compelling, especially the bass at around the 1 minute and 30-second mark. There's some spicy chords in there too. This sounds pretty difficult to perform, and I suspect Griffiths is restraining the rhythm a bit. It sounds very strictly counted and on the slow side of what the tempo wants to be, but everything lands where it's supposed to, and the sometimes haunting orchestral sounds come through strongly. Griffiths is clearly emphasizing the French elements in this work. The recording, by the way, is completely transparent, and we get a lot of detail. At the 5 minute and 20-second mark, a percussive section starts, which puts us more in our Western imaginary world of what Turkey is like, and of course that's where I'm going to start the samples, because I want to give you sort of a Turkish flavor of the work. Let's hear a bit of that. Afterwards, we go back into the magical orchestration. The piece sort of marches off into the distance at the end with a final falling line that crescendos and ends with a burst of percussion. Tracks 2 through 6 is a work by the composer Cemal Reşit Rey, and this one is called Instantaneler, which means snapshots. This is composed in 1931. Rey was born in Jerusalem as the son of an Ottoman governor. The family emigrated to Paris in 1913, where he studied piano with Marguerite Long, took composition lessons with Gabriel Fauré, and learned conducting with Henri Defossé. His early compositions are influenced by French Impressionism, but later he increasingly integrated elements from the Turkish tradition. This is one of his earlier works. It offers 5 quasi-photographic miniatures of the surroundings of the metropolis on the Bosporus. Track 1 is entitled Pulicilar Alaru Çekiyor, which means fishermen pulling the nets. Fishermen pulling the nets. I can't say this the way the Turkish speakers did. My apologies to Ebru and Yalçın. Anyway, it means fishermen pulling the nets. The double basses and cellos describe the work of the fishermen. There's a heaviness to the bass here. The rhythm sounds almost Russian in its heaviness. We're meant to feel the weight of the nets, and that comes across. Higher strings come in with atmospheric, swirling sounds, seeming to represent the wind, and the wind instruments sometimes come in with brief shrieks. There's a bit of percussion, too. I'm going to sample the ending of this work, so let's hear a bit of that. That's the end of the movement. The second movement, Ama Dilenci Kadun, Blind Beggar Woman. The bassoon and violins lament as the blind beggar woman. This is quietly played, with a bassoon playing a staccato theme. I really do like the way that these composers really go for the low reed instruments in these works so often, a sound that we really like on this podcast. The violin plays sustained tones. The rhythm rather stops and starts here, indicating the woman's unsteady approach. Track 4 is the third movement, Eyüp Güvercinleri, Pigeons in Eyüp. This captures the pigeon's lively and sometimes acrobatic flight across the famous mosque near the Golden Horn. It's very brief at 42 seconds, and it features swirling strings and lightly bowed strings playing a theme in harmony. There's a percussive explosion just before the end, which disappears as the pigeons continue their flight. Track 5, Boş Cami İçi, Inside an Empty Mosque. This is a piano solo with the pedal held down and a mystical melody taking us inside the mosque. The piano tones are played at about a mezzo forte and allowed to ring out. We get the sense of a large, echoey space. This is clever, and the modal harmony is evocative. So let's give a sample of this. Very evocative, and that's already half of the piece. You'll have to find the link to hear the rest of it. Track 6, the fifth movement, Bayram, which means feast. The orchestra's full potential creates the vibrant atmosphere of a national holiday and folk festival. This is the first time we hear the full orchestra in this suite, and it's colorful. I love the rhythm and orchestration of the opening, so let's sample that. That sets quite an atmosphere. There's some melodic outbursts, but the attraction here is the light orchestration, which sometimes wafts like perfume. Next, track 7. This is a work by Ulvi Cemal Erkin, Symphonique Volume. This is composed in 1967, probably revised in 1969. This is called Symphonic Movement. So, Erkin was born in Istanbul into a family of intellectuals and civil servants. He's one of Turkey's 5 pioneering composers, of course. He studied piano and composition in Paris, notably with Nadia Boulanger. Man, everybody who studied with her came away sounding really great. This was his last work. He died of a heart attack almost 3 years later. It's expressive and dramatic. The piece summarizes a musician's life between West and East. Erkin combines Turkish makams, traditional folk melodies, complex and spiritual rhythms, and mystical sounds. The xylophone and harp are given an important role. Can I accent that one instrument? The xylophone. Right, the harp we're used to. We don't really hear the xylophone often enough in the orchestra these days. So this has an atmospheric opening, fairly spacey as the sound emerges from the deeps of the orchestra. There's a sudden forte with a long sustained crescendoing chord. Erkin seems to be a bit of a colorist, too, in his orchestration. The work has some gorgeous timbral combinations. They're generally heard after the fortissimo outbursts from the orchestra. The work progresses slowly from section to section, luxuriating in the timbre. Some hammering percussion also emerge by the third minute. The material seems to move from sudden outbursts to quieter atmospheric sections. I'm rather at a loss as to what to sample here, so let's go for the big climax at the 7-minute mark after a long crescendo. After this, there's a more active rhythmic section with angular lines, which again, I feel are read too literally off the page in this performance. There's got to be some impetus for this rhythm. Anyway, the rhythm starts to become a part of the overall composition. There are a few more climaxes, and the work ends with a sort of coda into the quieter, more impressionistic timbral material we heard towards the beginning. Track 8 is a work by Necil Kazım Akses. It's his poem for cello and piano. All right, now I don't know what to make of this because the booklet notes say for cello and piano, but it's played here by violin and piano. Now, I don't know if the original is for the cello and they just arranged it for a violin. I'm not really sure what the situation is here, but we're going to hear this as a work for violin and piano. The violinist is Alican Suner, and the pianist is Iris Şentürker. Akses was born in Istanbul, and he tried to combine Turkish tradition with the compositional techniques of Western classical music, except in his case, the Western tradition is located more toward Germany. He studied in Vienna with Joseph Marx and in Prague with Josef Suk and Alois Haba, and he was involved in the founding of the Ankara Conservatory. This work is inspired by Turkish poetry. In the performance, the violin appears as a poet who recites his verses while singing, and the piano takes on a dual role, on the one hand as an accompanist and on the other as a poet who also responds in verse. So this is a rather odd inclusion on the album, given that it's a chamber work. We're going to hear another one later, too, in fact. It's immediately attractive, though, with the violin singing out its full melody and the piano accompanying with arpeggios and chords underneath. So I'm going to sample the opening. Keep in mind, the violin is supposed to be the poet reciting his poetry. Yeah, really beautiful. The violin's melody remains inspired the entire time it plays, with the piano occasionally coming in and commenting. At 2 minutes and 47 seconds or so, a new section starts with the solo piano playing a theme. The violin eventually comes in with its theme for this new section. At 4 minutes and 39 seconds, the piano launches another new section, and this time the violin comes in with more passion, accenting the beginning of phrases and double stops. The violin gets a particularly touching melody at 5 minutes and 30 seconds after the drama has subsided. And I really wanted to isolate this as well because I thought it was really beautiful, at least in its context. I hope it's going to come through in this sample. Yeah, I always want to have a poet around just for those beautiful moments. The rhythm gets more deliberate as the violin crescendos and ends the section with a rising line to a high note. There's silence, then the piano gets things going again, more calmly. There's a brief buildup of tension, then in the 9th minute we come back to gentle poetic melody. I like the modal arpeggios the piano has right at the beginning of the 10th minute. I like the last minute change of rhythm in the piano as it gets busier right toward the end, leading to the violin's final statement. This is a gorgeous work, one that chamber duos might want to consider taking up. Okay, the final composer of the Turkish 5 that we're going to hear on this album, and we've heard all 5 of them, is Ferit Tuzun, and this is his work Türk Capricciosu, written in 1957, means Turkish capriccio. Tuzun was from Istanbul. He studied in Munich with Karl Amadeus Hartmann and Karl Orff. You might remember him from Carmen and Burana. He belongs to the second generation of Turkish modernists. This work combines 4 melodies and rhythms of traditional dances with the entire palette of the symphony orchestra. This work is a tribute to Stravinsky's Rite of Spring, and it does sound a bit like the Rite of Spring. Let's hear the opening. Okay, now you listen to that and you say that doesn't sound anything like the Rite of Spring, but there are Rite of Spring elements in the work. So we heard that pretty energetic start, moving along almost recklessly. And here Griffiths does get a bit of rhythmic impetus from the orchestra, though again, details of the essence in his interpretations, and we get all of that too. This work is a lot more fun than the Rite of Spring, which comes across as ominous. There are a lot of time signature changes a la Stravinsky, and at the 2-minute 8-second mark, the bolder rolling downhill quality of the opening stops, and we get a quieter section which really is gesturally similar to the quieter sections of the Rite. This gets more active, and if you know Stravinsky's ballet, you'll notice all the familiar gestures from that ballet. Tuzun was 28 years old when he wrote this, and he does sound enthralled by Stravinsky's work. At the 6-minute mark, the more Turkish opening rhythm is back, and predictably, these are the parts of the work that I like the most. There are still Stravinsky gestures to be heard on the way to the sudden end. It's certainly a well-composed, well-orchestrated work. All right, so we've heard the 5 most famous Turkish composers that really established Turkish music, and that ends CD1. Even on the streaming, the music is combined into CD1 and CD2. On CD2, we get contemporary Turkish composers, and we start that with Mahir Çetiz, born in 1977, his work Noreen Düşleri, Dreams of a River, for orchestra. He was born in Ankara, and he studied at Columbia University with Fabien Levy, Tristan Moret, and Fred Lerdahl. Now, if you know any of their music, you know you're in for quite a sonic adventure here. His interests and influences include Middle Eastern and traditional Indian music, medieval polyphony, and the perception of musical gestures, and he currently teaches at University of Memphis in Tennessee in the United States. In his notes for this work, Çetiz refers to a classic of Turkish literature, Yasar Kemal's first novel, Mehmed, which means My Hawk, from 1955. Çetiz was inspired by Kemal's descriptions of nature and how every element of it had its own identity. This piece is based on a static note around which new figurations initially emerge. From there, a musical flow develops which gradually takes hold of the entire orchestra. So this work sounds very Western to me. The piece itself starts quietly with that single note, and we hear others gradually emerge from it. I like this sort of opening where from the simple sounds, complex patterns eventually emerge. This has some spicier harmony to it than the previous works, though it's all subtle, and some compelling orchestration is heard as well. It takes time to get going, building up slowly, which I rather appreciated as well. There are a lot of subtle, quiet timbres to enjoy. We finally get a forte outburst at around the 4-minute and 23-second mark. This decrescendos and further subtle sections emerge. Again, it's hard to know what to sample, but I think I want to give a sense of the orchestration. So let's go for this rather quiet section at around the 6-minute mark. Some pretty enchanting sounds there. There's a really enchanting section at 7 minutes and 30 seconds for what might be a solo vibraphone, though I can't tell. The sustain seems very long, though, so I'm guessing it's a vibraphone. The amorphous rhythm continues to the end with gorgeous sounds emerging right up to that point. Tracks 11 through 12 is the composer and pianist, Fazıl Say. He's very famous, a lot of people know him, and this is his work, Şameran, Opus 85, composed in the year 2020 for solo cello, percussion, and orchestra. And I didn't get pronunciations for these two musicians. The cellist is Jamal Aliyev, and the percussionist is Tansu Karapinar. Say is better known as a pianist, but has turned his attention more and more to composition in recent years. An old Anatolian legend tells of a young man who discovers the underground garden kingdom of the legendary Maranas, who are hybrid creatures, half human, half snake. The young man falls under the spell of their queen, Şameran. When he gains her trust and is released, he initially keeps her whereabouts secret, but reveals it afterwards to the Sultan, who hopes that eating Şameran's meat will cure him of a serious illness. Şameran is captured and killed, so the story comes to a tragic end. This legend is a starting point for this two-part composition. So the first movement is called Şameranun Cennet Bahçesi, Paradise Garden of Şameran. Here, Say evokes the garden with great effort in timbres, including the classic Turkish kudum drums and sophisticated playing techniques. There are some light percussive hits in the exotic opening. The kudum is heard for the first time just before the 1 minute mark, and let's hear a section with that instrument. I'm going to go for around the 2 minute mark here. Say remains inventive throughout with his timbres and rhythmic approach. Griffiths does well to pull all of this out of the texture. The music quietens a bit at the 4th minute, acting as a solo space for the cello, who bows very rapidly on double-stopped chords and plays with passionate feeling. The space widens as Aliyev plays, bringing the tone down to almost a whisper. Energy picks up in the 6th minute, the kudum comes back, and we're led to the end of the movement. Track 12 is the second and final movement, İhanet, which means betrayal. This has a rainy, atmospheric landscape with the cello as a virtuoso solo voice. The piece is designed both for the concert hall and as a ballet. This starts with some Eastern chords from a plucked guitar-like instrument, and the cello played pizzicato in its high end. It's pretty ominous and sets an Eastern atmosphere through timbre as well as melodic shape. Let's hear the opening. The intensity gradually picks up as the strings come in with a halting theme. Rhythm speeds up by the 3rd minute and the kudum drum is heard again. At 4 minutes and 40 seconds, a drooping theme is heard in the weepy cello, possibly Şameran lamenting her fate. The ending of this section is solemn and consists of harp-like sounds playing wonderful modal patterns. At 7 minutes and 30 seconds, the kudum is back and trails off as the piece ends. All right, I have my work cut out for me saying this next composer's name. Zeynep Gedizliolu. Born in 1977, his work is called Kayip Sesis Lin Anunsuna Ramen. Despite the Memory of the Lost Silence. This is from 2012. Gedizliolu is from Izmir and studied in Istanbul, Germany, and France. One of her teachers was the recently deceased Wolfgang Rimm, who we talked about just a week ago. Interestingly, she prefers to compose in cafes because she suffers from tinnitus and can therefore balance the constant internal noise with external acoustic sounds. The booklet suggests that against this background, the title of this piece suggests an autobiographical reference. It's called Despite the Memory of the Lost Silence. This starts up high in the orchestral range with low bass rumblings coming in and some dramatic gestures. Let's hear the opening. Some pretty interesting sounds and rhythms in there. It sort of sounds like we're hearing the high and low end of the orchestra without the middle filled in. The melodizing is interesting since this seems to be a scale foreign to Western ears. It also includes glissandos that give the material a bending quality. The piece does come across as a bit wild, but again, its hair is neatly combed in this performance. That's okay though. We certainly get a sense of the wildness and oddness of the piece. In the third minute, there's a silence and a new section starts, which includes a passage for low drums, which could be ethnic, I can't really tell. They sound more or less like bass drums. They get the stage solo for a while, but the orchestra re-enters in the fifth minute and adds more histrionic wildness. The music actually calms down for a while toward the end, relying heavily on combined timbre and sudden changes of dynamics for its effects. The music sort of slowly evaporates away toward the ending. An interesting piece. Track 14, Sinem Altan. His piece is String Quartet No. 1, or Yalu Durlusu Nubir, which is subtitled Hurcin, meaning unruly. This is from 2015. Played by Emmanuel Coppi, Abigail Krelig on violins, Mattis Rochat on viola, and Paul Heyman on cello. So this is going to be a chamber piece again. Altan is from Ankara, lives and works in Berlin and Vienna. This composer has said that this quartet acts as an unruly being, hence the title. The basic melodic material is derived from a Turkish makam melody. Again, a chamber work breaks up the orchestral sounds. This starts with highly active swirling lines that stop frequently. You can hear the Turkish quality of the material in its phrasing as well as the mode. Let's hear the opening of this. By the second minute, solo lines emerge from the quartet. This section thins out the texture a bit with sul ponticello playing in otherwise very light tones. There's an attractive dancing melody from 4 minutes and 50 seconds in the first violin. It ends inconclusively. Unruly it may be, but this is an attractive piece. Track 15, our final track on this excursion through Turkish music. Onur Türkmen, his piece Gel, which means come, from 2019. Türkmen was born in 1972 in Eskişehir. He uses traditional Turkish musical instruments and modes, and he actually completed his composition studies in a jazz environment at the Berklee College of Music. The title is from a line by the Sufi poet Imadeddin Neshimi. I didn't get the pronunciation for his name. Come, let us burn in the fire of love. Fire is understood as a cleansing process, as a metaphor for the demise of the self and overcoming earthly bonds on the way to merging with the all, the universe. What a great way to end the album, to merge with the universe. Turkmen says the piece should serve as a catharsis both for him and for the musicians and audience. This starts with a huge orchestral gesture, fortissimo, which decrescendos and leads to more abstract overlapping figures. There are occasional vocal outbursts from the orchestra yelling the title of the piece, Gel, and perhaps a few other words as well. After the opening, the orchestra quietens and sections of sustained activity pass with again some interesting orchestration. A lot of this work will focus on a single harmony given some kind of rhythm or a wavering tone. I'm going to sample that. This is about 3 minutes and 30 seconds into the work. The fifth minute of the piece features a light trudge of a rhythm with voices uttering the title percussively. There's a final crescendo of a gesture, then the piece ends. And that's the end of the album. I'm really glad I got to hear this. It's a very welcome album of works I knew nothing about previously, by composers I didn't know anything about previously either, with the exception of Fazil Say, really. Now, I made a few cracks about how the performances, and especially the rhythm, are on the careful side, but since these works are rarely recorded, it's good to have a record of them in which the score is accurately reflected. The performances are all very good, especially on the timbral side. The recording allows the quietest tones to emerge, and these composers, especially the Turkish Five, had an ear for timbre. The album itself really is a bit of a catalogue of Turkish music. As a program, these works serve more to demonstrate the variety of styles of Turkish music, rather than to communicate any kind of unified idea. This includes the decision to include 2 chamber works on the album along with the orchestral works. Still, this album was an hour and 40 minutes of music that I was totally unfamiliar with, and now I feel all the richer for having heard it. I'd urge listeners to hear this piece by piece, perhaps not straight through. Given the variety, you're bound to take to some of these pieces more than others, depending on your taste. There's a lot of variety, and it could come across as a bit overwhelming when heard together, but individually, these pieces all make an impression.
Interestingly, all of the composers found a unique way to incorporate elements of Turkish musical heritage into modern classical works, and my notes reflect what you just said. There's a lot of variety here.
Yeah.
It's not always easy listening, but I found it interesting and especially enjoyed the generous use of percussion instruments in the orchestral works as a common element. And the sonics on the recording are excellent as well. The bass drums will shake your house. There's some powerful brass. And the chamber works are interesting too. They kind of balance out the bombastic nature of some of the pieces. Interesting to hear these modes again, especially after last week. Some interesting tones that we don't usually hear in the scales, in the rest of the classical music that we listen to. It was really interesting to hear these different influences of like Bartók. There's some impressionist ideas in the harmony in places too. And it all comes out as something completely unique. So as you say, having all of these composers together with a Turkish theme and background on one recording will probably be a good resource in the future. And hopefully we get some more recordings of these and other works by these composers.
Yeah, and now I'm up to the contemporary album of the week, although we've already heard a lot of contemporary Turkish music, so it's a big contemporary selection this week. This is our second selection from Navona Records. It's called Resurgence, New Works for Cello and Piano. The musicians on this album are Ovidiu Marinescu, the cellist, who is Romanian and now lives in the USA, And Noreen Cassidy-Polera on the piano. I'm guessing she's American, although I couldn't really find much information about her outside of the booklet. This was released on July 26th. The notes for this program say that the album offers reflections on emergence and transformation, the throes of long-distance love, the great artists of our past and present, the fusion of several musical influences, and more.
It's a lot to include.
Yeah, in other words, what they're saying is, like the Turkish album, this is going to have a lot of variety on it.
Yes,
And it's true, it does.
Yeah.
Yeah, it does. Each composer has written a description of their own work included on the album. I'll be referring to those often. Okay, the first composer, track 1. Liova Bueno, born in the Dominican Republic, and he now lives in Victoria, British Columbia, Canada. His work, Alma Caribeña. The work fuses influences not only from the Dominican Republic, but also from Haiti, which shares the island of Hispaniola with the Dominican Republic, and Cuba. This is a polytonal, polyrhythmic piece infused with elements of merengue, son, guaguancó, balada, and bolero. The work starts rhythmically in the piano and features a heavy cello tone, including a lot of deep pizzicati. There are a lot of quick changes of rhythm. I'm going to sample this from a little bit in, from about the 35-second mark, so that we can hear both instruments. Cassidy-Polera keeps the rhythm moving while Marinescu both plays the lead and accompanies via pizzicato. This sounds like a tricky work to play with all of its changing rhythmic patterns. They tend to change from section to section. It's pretty complex, but upbeat and on the fun side. At 2 minutes and 51 seconds, a slower section starts in the contemplative piano. The cello takes up this feeling and bows with full, sweet tone. There's another pause at around 3 minutes and 40 seconds, and the work continues at a similar tempo. At 4 minutes and 30 seconds, the rhythm suddenly snaps into something more celebratory and upbeat. There's a nice build-up to the end, particularly by the piano, who pretty much has the lead while the cello comments. Track 2, Joanna Estelle, Canadian composer of Ukrainian heritage. Her Valsa de Saudade, or Waltz of Longing. The two main themes were originally written for the cellist Ovidiu Marinescu and his second wife, Søren, who were not able to live together immediately after their marriage for various reasons. They worked in different countries. The piece evolved as a result of comparing joyful social media pictures of Ovidiu when he was with Søren versus despondent photos when he was not. The opening represents the two sweethearts pining for one another. Theme B, beginning in F major, is a tender melody that expresses their joy when together. This work has sort of a 19th century romantic feel to it in the piano, and also in the melodic cello line, which is catchy. I'm going to sample the opening. This is the pining theme. Sad, sad, sad. We get a good sense of Marinescu's sweet tone in this work, which he doesn't use in the first piece, going for a rougher, more aggressive tone there. Here it's all singing and dancing when the lovers come together. This is a pretty easy work to follow narratively, so I'll leave you to it. It's very pretty all the way through, even in the sad sections. Track 3, Paul Halley, Australian composer, his Cello Fantasia from 2009. This is a piece for solo cello. We hear a theme in the solo cello at the beginning, whose first 8 notes will be the building blocks for the rest of the piece. Let's hear it. So easy to remember, almost like Bach-like, really, the way it sounds.
Yeah.
It's got like it almost sounds like one of his cello suite themes.
Right.
Yeah, the cello's theme relies on arpeggiated figures, and the harmony is very attractive again. And again, we get a sense of Marinescu's full, beautiful tone in this piece. Track 4, L. Peter Deutsch from Massachusetts, USA, and now lives in Sonoma County, California, and British Columbia, Canada. His work is called Awakening. Deutsch says that he based this piece on a hidden Morse code structure that is responsible for the very short phrases separated by short rests. He wound up with a dance-like result. The piece starts with the piano taking the lead and the cello accompanying with pizzicati. This then switches, and each instrument gets the lead at different points. As has been the case on this album, the thematic material is catchy and pleasant to listen to. Let's sample this one too. Something like woodsy or countryside to the sound of this. It's kind of rustic sounding in a way. It ends in an unresolved fashion, but is very satisfying as an overall work. Tracks 5 and 6 are 2 of the 3 movements from Catherine Neville's work, 3 movements of Sun and Shadow. You gotta wonder why they didn't include all 3 movements here. We only get 2 and 3. Anyway, Catherine Neville is an American composer, and the second movement is an adagio. Now, the composer calls this movement, "It flickers and it's gone" in the notes. This 3-movement work, of which we hear only 2 movements, is about isolation and sadness and the overcoming of it. The composer remembers a concert she attended just after the COVID pandemic, where everyone was widely separated, and she says she found it lonelier than the online meetings to which she'd become accustomed. I understand the feeling. The optimism that had drawn her to the concert disappeared, and isolation took its place. So this work starts with mildly ominous piano bass. The cello comes in and takes up the piano's theme. The theme overall is sad. At 2 minutes and 7 seconds, the piano line shows some more life and probably some optimism as it becomes more ornate. The end of the movement reverts to the opening tempo and theme. It's attractive, but sad and lonely sounding. Track 6, the 3rd movement, is marked reflective, and the previous movement had ended in E minor. This one carries us from E minor to major. The movement reflects a transformation. The counterpoint nods to both the Baroque and Indonesian music which inspired the piece. We emerge from the shadowy flickers into full sunlight, enjoying the moment all the more for the sadness that has come before. So this starts with the cello playing yet another attractive theme, and I have to give Marinescu credit for constantly finding the attractiveness of the themes and putting them across with such beauty. The tempo is on the slow side, but this does acquire a more upbeat feel to it due to the major tonality. I'm going to sample this from the middle around the 2-minute mark. There are some attractive changes of rhythm in this work, particularly the one just before the 3-minute mark. At 3 minutes and 46 seconds, we hear the A section again, or something like it, which brings us to an ending that's more positive than the beginning. Track 7, Ray Farner, American composer. His work is called Becoming. It's a work for solo cello. The composer calls it a playful exploration of the expressive possibilities of the instrument. It's in 4 sections, And it starts pretty dramatically with an outburst of feeling. Let's hear that. It's melodic at times, but for the most part aims at expressive gestures. These come in all shapes and sizes: double stopping, pizzicato, sudden outbursts, digging in with the bow, harmonics, and a lot more. It's just as well I sampled the beginning, because within each of the 4 sections of this piece are momentary expressive gestures that give a different idea of what the piece might be about. It needs to be heard in full, in other words, to get a sense of it. It sounds pretty virtuosic, and Marinescu is up to the task. When you listen without being able to see the cellist, each new sound comes as a surprise. It's a work made up of gestures and ends inconclusively. Tracks 8 through 11 are the 4 movements of a single work, John A. Carollo's We Will Never Witness Another of His Kind. Interesting title. Carollo was born in Turin, Italy, and was brought to the USA by his adoptive parents. That's pretty interesting. You usually don't hear stories like this about composers. Anyway, Carollo is a pretty interesting character. He's been a collector of Edward Gorey's work all his life. Now, I was in college in the 80s, and I remember his book, The Gashly Crumb Tinies, was really popular with a lot of the students. It was pretty creepy. It's a children's alphabet book in which the 26 children are all shown dying horrible deaths, and they're all kind of linked to the alphabet. Like A is for Amy, who fell down the stairs. B is for Basil, assaulted by bears, etc. Charming. It really fit into the vibe of my college days. Carollo says when he reflects back on the achievements of an artist, he thinks of other great artists and thinks, will we ever witness such greatness again? It brings to mind the lives of Bach, Beethoven, and Mozart in the musical world, and he wonders if today someone who walks among us, perhaps unrecognized, is achieving something very special that future generations, when looking back, will marvel at his or her greatness. Those thoughts are the inspiration for this work, though the work itself doesn't necessarily illustrate those thoughts. Yeah, this is a really strange sort of idea. He was having these thoughts while he composed the work, and that's why it's got that title. But the work isn't really about that. It's really not about anything. Anyway, the first movement is called Con Bravura, or is labeled Con Bravura, and it starts with some heavy, dark sounds on the cello. The piano gets involved after the cello's opening, much higher up in range on the keyboard than the cello's opening. The cello and piano are sometimes at odds with each other in this work, sometimes seeming to go off in their own directions. I'm going to sample into where it gets going a little bit. This is at about the 2nd minute. You can hear the cello and piano coming together to trade a theme at the end of the sample, but the music quickly morphs into something heavier and more aggressive. The movement moves towards an open 5th growl in the cello and a final line in the piano to end it. Track 9, the 2nd movement, Animato. This starts with a swirling figuration. Again, the cello and piano sound off in their own individual worlds, and much of the movement continues like that. Let's hear the opening. In the second minute, the cello gets a wandering line that finally settles into double-stopped chords. The piano gets a brief exploratory section where the left and right hands aren't necessarily lining up with common musical purpose. That seems to be a big part of what this work is about. The piano does start heading in a particular harmonic direction in the last minute, and the cello is back in to assist the piano towards a forte but inconclusive ending. Track 10, the third movement, is labeled Baie and is labeled also Intenso. The piano gets some harsh-sounding repeated chords at the opening. The cello sets a rhythm as the piano begins a line consisting of dotted rhythms, then staccato eighths, I'd guess. There's a heavy rhythmic quality to the entire movement, syncopated as the piano plays harsh-sounding harmonies and the cello saws at the strings in rhythm. This movement also ends suddenly without resolution. Track 11, the final movement, fourth movement, Delicato Tristezza. This starts softly and with a bit of remorse in the cello tone and line. The remorse remains as the cello starts exploring harmonic possibilities, the piano simply playing splashes of notes and chords in the high end and mid-range of the instrument. A new building section starts in the third minute after a resolution on an open fifth in the cello. This builds into a syncopated rhythm that has a dance quality to it. There's a constant attempt to bring the material up the scale to some kind of resolution, which is never reached. I'm going to sample this from way deep into the piece at around the 6th minute. The music lightens in the 7th minute, moving to pianissimo dynamic, and it stays there as the cello begins playing longer, quiet tones. Even so, only an unsure resolution is reached. And that's the end of the album. Overall, it's an enjoyable album, too. For the most part, the works are light and aim to please, with the more challenging works coming towards the end, so in other words, from tracks 7 through 11. Even so, they're not off-putting, just adding some heavier spice to the harmony. Some of the works are melodically catchy, and I credited cellist Ovidiu Marinescu with his ability to shape the melodic lines as beautifully as possible, making sure they're catchy for the listener. This is especially true in Joanna Estelle's piece Valse de Saudade, Track 2, and the 2 movements of Catherine Neville's 3 movements for Sun and Shadow. I didn't mention Noreen Cassidy-Polera yet, so I should say she's expressive when she needs to be, and really is an ideal accompanist when called to accompany. We hear her step out the most in the final John A. Carollo work, We Will Never Witness Another of His Kind, and in the opening work by Liova Bueno, Alma Caribeña. I guess the common denominator of the album doesn't go beyond contemporary works for cello and piano from English-speaking countries, with Dominican composer Liova Bueno currently residing in Canada. The album provides a chance to hear the variety of approaches to composition in practice today, as well as to hear a very fine cello and piano duo in Ovidiu Marinescu and Noreen Cassidy-Polera.
It was an interesting program. When I knew it was a contemporary program, I wasn't quite expecting it to have such a sweet center to it with these melodic works here.
You're
I really enjoyed those pieces the most, since I love the lyrical tone of the cello. But the other works had more modern harmony and interesting rhythmic natures that showed off the musicianship and interplay of this duo, and they do play really well together. And as you say, the common theme is that it's just contemporary works here for these 2 instruments. There's not a lot else similar about the music, but I found the variety of it made it quite interesting. And the sonics are really nice on this recording as well. So all fans of cello, I think, will enjoy this. And it's nice to hear a duo with kind of the most intimate interplay and interaction. And that comes out in various aspects of these works. That's 2 from Navona this week.
Navona records, they're always very helpful, and I want to thank Chelsea Cornago for all of her help in getting me the booklets and all the information I needed to do those 2 presentations.
Yeah, thanks, Chelsea. All right, over on the jazz side, we've also got a lot of variety. geographically, stylistically, and instrumentally. And we're going to start out with a debut trumpet recording, Mike.
Yeah, this was pretty interesting.
I have to work on my Dutch pronunciation.
Okay.
For this one.
Too bad you didn't meet any Dutch friends at the cafe the way I did.
No, I didn't. Yes. Yeah. Not that it would have helped me much anyway. But
you're right. Well, I don't think it helped me much either with the Turkish pronunciations, but we'll find out.
The first recording is called Mirrors, and it's on Mindless Moose Music. It's a young trumpeter, Bram van der Glind. Came out August 1st. Bram van der Glind is a jazz trumpeter, composer, arranger, and band leader. He also plays drums, piano, and bass guitar. In addition, he's been involved in various theater productions. His bio says he was born in 1999 and raised in Lith. He graduated from the HKU Utrecht Conservatory in 2021. He's won various talent awards in the Netherlands. This is his debut recording containing all original compositions. The recording notes explain that his pieces are about recognizable, vulnerable subjects such as love, family, and losing your loved ones. With his music, he connects with his audience and gives them the space to seek reflection of themselves while listening. Hence the title Mirrors. So on the recording, Bram van der Glind trumpet and flugelhorn, all compositions, as well as I mentioned, Demian de Munk on the drums, Stan Verstegen on piano, and Eric Robard on bass. And the recording is going to start out with a tune called Sand from Home. This has kind of a dreamy opening with a piano intro of triplet figures. It sounds like van der Glind is on flugelhorn, and he comes in with a lyrical melody. It's 32 measures, similar halves with different endings. In the second half, or the repeat, the bass doubles his lines. Let's hear this recording get started. After that section ends, there's a new transition section of 10 measures into a short improvised solo, and drums sneak in with cymbal rolls. Verstegen takes over for a piano solo, sensitively played, but building up energy with tremolos and punchy chords, and van der Glind adds some legato backing lines and returns with improvisations of his own after a slight hesitation when the piano solo ends. Let's hear some of his improvised ideas on this song. It's lyrically musical, but it's kind of interesting how he squeezes off the ends of phrases there to keep it from getting too pretty. After that, there's a section with a flurry of trills for an animated climax before a soft ending to the tune. And speaking of the moose, track 2 is called the Mindless Moose. This has a soft but playful melody with repeating syncopated trumpet figures and nice interaction with Roubard's bass. It keeps you guessing with little gaps and hesitations of phrase. Let's check it out. It picks up a rumbling motion, as you hear from there, and then finishes off with the familiar figure we've been hearing. Verstegen is up for a piano solo first with a nice sense of swing and trickling lines. Let's check out some of his playing on this tune. Glind comes in trilling into an energetic solo with interesting rhythmic lines and energy that pushes right to the end without going back to the original melody. Track 3 is Come and Go, and this is a long tune at over 11 minutes, and it has a lot of different sections. Verstegen has a rubato solo piano introduction that lasts about 1 minute and 40 seconds before Van der Glind joins in on the soft flugelhorn melody. It's melancholy and introspective. The arpeggiated piano rhythm gives way to more of a bass-led waltzing feel for a bit, but it comes to an ending before 4 minutes, before a new rippling rising piano figure section restarts things. The drum beat gradually builds up in this section under Van der Glind's improvisations that show some nice agility. Let's listen to some of his playing further on in the tune. Verstegen follows with a solo, and De Monk keeps the beat popping underneath. Van der Glind is back with some softer rhythmic riffs to a reprise of the initial ballad melody. Track 4 is called Yellow Blues in Red. This starts with an alternating half-note interval bass line for 12 measures that continues on underneath. Van der Glind comes in on the repeating riff melody. Sounds like on trumpet here. There's a repeating 14-measure section and then two 12-measure sections. Let's take a listen. Verstegen is up for a swinging piano solo first. It's following a 12-bar blues progression, and he works up a lot of excitement. Van der Glind starts out his solo playfully and works it up to a climax with repeated ideas and false fingerings, and he really lays on a note working up some dissonance. Let's check that out. It's back to the bass interval idea from before and ends up with the 14-measure and 12-measure melody sections. Track 5 is In Your Eyes. This starts with a ringing repeated bass note joined by piano and drums in a 12-measure intro. The happy flugelhorn melody has a 14-measure section, an 8-measure rhythm section interlude, and then a new section with different harmonic ideas working into a syncopated rhythm section build-up to a bass solo from Robard. Let's hear some of his playing on this tune. Verstegen follows from there with piano solo, and Van der Glind returns with the melody and some improvisations to the ending. It's the shortest tune on the recording at 3 minutes and 47 seconds. Track 6 is Happy Birthday. This gets going with a unique rhythmic piano figure intro idea with ringing bass notes. Van der Glind has a Harmon muted trumpet here and comes in with the legato long note melody lines that work to a more rhythmic descending line section. Let's listen from where he enters. It goes around those sections again with some legato trumpet improvisations. Next is a very animated syncopated rhythm section transition to a kind of somber processional that Van der Glind blows reverby soft improvisations over. It really starts to work up and transforms with a lot of drum energy, and Van der Glind is squeezing higher and higher. The animated section returns to end it with more trumpet improvisations. Let's listen to the ending of the tune. And it rings out on a hold there at the end. Track 7. Now I have no idea how to pronounce this one. Resurgence. It's a waltz ballad with just Van der Glind's horn and bass dancing together at the beginning. There's a repeating 16-measure section and then a new section that works into some syncopated piano chords that transitions to a piano solo. Let's take a listen. Yeah, very pretty. Van der Glind's solo on this tune is animated and works into him being left on his own for a cadenza, so let's check out some of that. So it gets restarted with the melody from there and some final fading improvisations to wrap it up. And the final tune on the recording is called January Song. It's a duet with piano. This starts with an 8-measure intro of descending piano chord figures that get a repeating note added on top, and Van der Glind comes in with the melody that has a repeating figure that becomes familiar. There are 4 8-measure sections with 4-measure piano interludes between them, except for the last section. Let's hear it get started. And let's hear some of Van der Glind's soft and lyrical improvisations on this final tune. And from there, Verstegen has a little piano section before Van der Glind is back with a short final melody segment to finish the recording. Van der Glind's debut is mostly a relaxed recording. As the title suggests, his original compositions are reflective and introspective. His improvisations are lyrical and melodic, but he also shows a sense of swing and the ability to build up some harmonic tension, like in Yellow Blues in Red. Verstegen's piano playing creates a lot of the atmosphere for the recording, using a lot of changing rhythmic patterns, and his solos have a nice touch and clear articulation. A young trumpeter here with his debut. I'll be keeping an ear out for what Van der Glind does next.
I thought this was a really good recording. The recorded sound was really great on this, and it captured his Van der Glind's smoky tone really well. He's sort of a laid-back, as you said, low-key soloist, and he sometimes gets some exciting lines going, but he's not the type of player who wants to blow away the audience. He sticks to a more modest musical approach, and I really appreciated that. He's really good at setting a mood for slower tones, and this album has a lot of those, with tempos ranging from ballads to mid-tempo. The piano has a jazz style, but often will revert to classical or even new age type arpeggios in accompaniment, depending on the mood being set. He's got an attractive way with solos too, very melodic with some pretty scales at times. The bass is very present on the album, often going into his high end, and he adds a lot to the material, as do the drums with their not always straightforward rhythmic approach. It's an ear-catching album and very musical. I thought it was an enjoyable debut.
Yeah, very good.
Yeah.
25 years old.
Wow.
It's a long future ahead. All right, next, some guitar. A quintet, as a matter of fact, from Danish guitarist Søren Lie, his new recording Hope on Zack's Music. This came out July 26th. Søren Lie, born in 1966 in Copenhagen. Danish jazz guitarist and composer. He started playing at the age of 10. He took guitar lessons for about 2 years and then began his professional career at the age of 15. In the summer of 88 to 1990, Søren went to New York City to try out the music world there and studied music at the New School for Jazz and Social Research. In 1990, he recorded his first solo album with the great bassist Ray Brown. The Søren Lie Quartet is the name of that. And Lie performed in 1991 with Jim Hall at the Village Vanguard in New York. We've heard him before on the podcast back in episode 138, Giant Genre Steps, on a recording by American drummer Brian Melvin called Transformation. That was on Storyville Records, and that was an organ trio format with the organist Mads Sondergaard, and we enjoyed that recording a lot. This recording here is a dedication to his late wife. So Søren Lie on electric and acoustic guitar on this recording and all original compositions. The great Victor Jones on drums. Jacob Dinesen, a well-known Danish saxophonist on saxophone here. Yasser Pino on bass. And Rune Harder Olsen on additional percussion. And the recording is going to get underway with a tune called Moving On. A bouncy one-note bass and guitar chords and rhythmic figures make an 8-measure intro. The happy melody has intertwining sax and guitar lines with a lot going on. It's 32 measures, kind of an AABA, but the final section is like a new variation of the A theme. Let's hear it into Lee getting started on a solo. We can hear there he has swelling chords underneath, and there are multiple guitar tracks throughout the recording on the tunes. I hear the influence of John Scofield in Lee's playing, but he really has an individual sense of phrasing in his solos. Let's come back and hear a little bit more of his improvisations here. Bluesy ending lick there, and Dennison follows with a spirited tenor sax solo before they take a final run through the melody. Track 2 is the title track, Hope. It's rubato and dreamy, with sax, electric, and acoustic guitar flowing along on the melody over ringing bass and cymbal washes. Judging from when we hear it again at the end in tempo, it sounds like a 32 measure construction. We'll just get a small taste in a 1-minute sample, but let's have a listen. Well, it gradually works into a steady tempo, and Lee's tone and improvised ideas are really exquisite on this tune, so let's have a listen to a little bit of his playing. Dennison gets a dreamy solo too from there. I thought it was kind of recessed in the mix a bit. We hear the melody again in tempo and an extended ending with improvised touches from Lee and Dennison. It creates a very peaceful sound in all. Track 3, Like Tears in the Rain, a soft and gentle bossa nova feeling tune, and Dennison has wispy melody lines and Lee works in acoustic and electric guitars. Lee gets a solo before a repeat of the melody. After that is a vamping ending with some airy improvisations from Dennison. Let's hear a little bit of his playing at the end of this tune. Goes to a soft ending from there. Track 4, Let's Go, a playful boppy rhythm changes tune here with an 8-measure drum intro from Jones. Let's hear it get started getting into Lee's solo. Really swinging in his solo here, lots of melodic ideas and constantly changing rhythmic figures. Let's hear a bit of Dennison on this one, starting out with a kind of calypso-like phrase and some speedy lines after that. Finishes up his solo using a part of the melody line idea, and they go once more through the melody to wrap up the tune. Track 5, Song for My Son. This reminded me of a couple different tunes.
Me too, yeah.
One is Bob Marley's No Woman, No Cry in the kind of atmosphere to it. After an 8-measure intro, Lee takes the melody, which has repeating 8-measure A and then B sections. It modulates for another round, with Dennison joining in that time. And Olesen adds a lot of extra atmosphere with percussion on this one. Let's take a listen. There's a little lift to it there when the sax comes in. Dennison has the first solo, relaxed and melodic, and Lee follows really great fluidity in his lines on this one. Let's take a listen. Connecting back to the melody idea from there to finish it up. Track 6 is called Living Now. It's a fun, funky one in 5/4 time. A drum fill gets it started, and Pino gets a funky bass ostinato going from the third beat. After the 8-measure intro, it turns out to be a 12-bar minor blues with some cool twists in the harmonies. Let's check it out. Dennison solos first from there. Lee's solo on this one has some adventurous harmonic excursions and biting articulation. Let's hear a little bit of that. Back to the melody with some final phrase repeats and a drum fill to end it. Track 7, Ballad for the Soul. It's a slow and wistful melody with sax, electric guitar, and acoustic all integrating. It's hard to sample much of it at this slow tempo. Here I'd like to just sample Lee's electric guitar solo over his own acoustic playing. just great tone and phrasing. Dennison has a solo here too, joining back into the melody with Lee for a thoughtful ending. Track 8, A Few More Steps. This sounds like a Coltrane Giant Steps derived idea. In like fashion, a repeating 16-measure melody, it's got angular lines that sound thick, worked by Lee and Dennison in unison. Let's check it out. Lee's really on fire on that one. Dennison has a solo as well, and Jones gets to trade a few rounds on drums with guitar and sax. Let's check out a little bit of that interchange. From there to finish things out. And the recording ends up with track 9, Funky Motion. The title is an accurate description. Nice electric bass work here from Pino. The melody builds as it goes along, adding sax lines to the guitar. Let's check it out. Solos from there, mixing rocky licks with blazing jazzy lines, and we just need to hear a little bit more since it's the last tune. there. Sounds like Dennison has an EWI or some other electronic sax effect that he uses to trade solo sections with his natural tenor before they return to the melody. And that's the recording. Søren Lee's a fabulous guitarist with great tone, chops, and ideas that easily fuse rock and modern jazz ideas. It was nice to hear acoustic guitar in the mix as well. Here we get to enjoy Lee's original compositions that have a lot of stylistic variety, from post-bop, funk, blues, and ballad material to more rocky numbers as well. You can feel the emotion in the more introspective songs that came out of a period when he lost his wife. A strong sense of hope does emerge from the melodies and solos, though. Dennison's mostly soft-toned sax balances out the edgier tone of Lee's guitar on the recording, and he has inspired solos throughout, and a solid and flexible rhythm section of Jones' Pino and extra percussion from Olesen, changing styles and grooves throughout. I really enjoyed this recording.
Yeah, you had mentioned the rock kind of quality to it. I even went further. I said there's something really dirty and kind of grimy about it, like in the Rolling Stones sense, about the playing of the album. At least in the first few tracks. It does change like towards the middle. There's enough distortion on the guitar to give the sense of grime. And even, I guess it's Jakob Dinneson's sax adds to that with his rough-edged tone. You know, he kind of sounds like the saxophone is like a cigarette-smoking sax or something. Yeah, the overall sound makes the playing exciting and edgy, I thought. There's even a light edge to ballads like Tears in the Rain. And by the way, that title, like Tears in the Rain, I was kind of wondering if that was lifted from Rutger Hauer's now immortal monologue at the end of Blade Runner. You know, because that's how he ends this monologue before he dies. This all changes up in Song for My Son, where the guitar and sax tones are both smooth and clean. We get to hear, everything kind of squeaky clean on that one. But this is the exception to the rule. This is a jazz album, certainly, but it has rock elements, like you said, in the sound, and occasionally the themes. And I thought Victor Jones had a smoking hot drum solo on a few more steps, and you sampled that. That was fantastic. I was really like, whoa, what was going on there? He's exciting and hard-hitting and rhythmically complex throughout the album. The album has a great funky send-off with funky motion, an overall sweaty honky-tonk vibe to it, and it's really fun to listen to.
Yeah, check it out. A really great guitarist that more people should know about. And the final recording, a unique one here, from the Tim Armacost Chordless Quintet. Something About Believing. This is on his own label, TMA Records, came out August 2nd. Tim Armacost grew up in Tokyo and Washington, D.C. His father was a diplomat and ambassador to Japan.
Wow.
Yeah, his life was quite international, living in Japan, India, the Philippines, Holland, and New York. He's worked with big names like Al Foster, Jimmy Cobb, Kenny Barron, Tom Harrell, Billy Hart, Victor Lewis, and Jeff Tain Watts, and more. He's recorded 14 albums as a leader, played on more than 60 as a sideman. I saw him play in Kyoto with the New York Standards Quartet some years back. On this recording, Tim Armacost on tenor saxophone, Tom Harrell on trumpet, Gary Smiljan on baritone sax, John Patitucci on bass, Al Foster on drums. What a lineup.
Yeah, real all-stars here.
The notes say Armacost, Al Foster, John Patitucci, and Gary Smiljan have been performing together since 2016, expanding the quartet's sound through the addition of a third horn voice, Tom Harrell on trumpet. The 5 pieces recording plans were put on hold due to the pandemic. Joyfully reunited in April of 2022, the ensemble's new record is a musical reflection of optimism of the sun returning after a long night. And also, inspired by Ray Drummond's description of Miles Davis's approach, gather a group of master musicians and turn them loose. Armacost selected the repertoire to facilitate gratifying and meaningful musical conversations. I think you'll find that to be true. And finally, Armacost says, I chose songs for this record that are beautiful and relatively simple to play on, so everyone could just revel in the experience of playing for fun and not having to think too much. This record is about human beings rather than ideas. We've got an interesting selection of compositions, too, starting out with an original from Armacost called It's Really Just a Blues. And if you know the song Mr. Day from 1962's Coltrane Plays the Blues, you'll recognize the bass and drum groove that starts this one out. Harold is in for the first chorus, then Smiljan, and then Armacost for a thick layer of horns. Armacost continues on with the first solo. Let's hear the recording get started. And Armacost's lines are free and snappy, but still working around the blues. On this one, let's check out some of Tom Harrell's solo, since I'm really looking forward to his new release later this month. Ideas are always really interesting. Smiljan follows with a Barry solo, keeping things connected with some sequences of figures, and Armacost and Harold join in at the end of his solo, and the horns do some trading as a group with Foster's drums before the horns take it around the blues a final time. I guess I should mention, if we have any kind of new jazz listeners and they're saying, where's the piano? Or if someone saw cordless. This is cordless, not in like your drill or some appliance. This C-H-O-R-D. And it just means without a harmony or chord playing instrument like piano or guitar. So you've got a lot more harmonic freedom. Here we get a lot of the harmonies from the horn arrangements themselves. Track 2, Dance to the Lady. This one is from tenor saxophonist John Handy. It goes back to his 1959 recording in the vernacular. It's a waltzing tune with an interesting structure. There's a repeating 14-measure section taken by trumpet and tenor first. Smiljan is in on the repeat, and then the saxes take the shorter 8-measure bridge section. The first section comes back with all the horns, but sort of sputters out before reaching the end into some harmonized horns that get Patitucci started on a rubato bass solo. He rings out relaxed melodic ideas, and the horns and drums are back with some arranged lines to get him into tempo again. That's kind of cute, and then leads into a solo from Smiljan. I'll sample from there in this tune. Armacost follows Smoleon's solo, and Foster and Patitucci have some fun with the backing underneath. Harold gets the final solo, and the horns take the arrangement through the melody again to a happy ending. Track 3 is The Chief. This is a tune by Al Foster from his 1997 recording Brandon. Foster kicks in this even beat tune. There's an 8-measure intro, and the 34-measure minor melody is kind of seductive, with Harold's trumpet hanging out from the saxes. Let's hear it. Armacost gets the first solo on this tune with some nice serpentine lines. Let's check some of that out. At the end of his solo, the horns all have a figure together as a transition to Harold's solo, and the saxes come in behind him with legato backing lines for a while. Smoleon gets the last solo, melodic and with some smooth double-time lines. They get back to the melody, but for the final section, switch to simultaneous horn improvisations to a fade-out. A very cool tune. Track 4, Something About Believing. Believe in the original Duke Ellington version, the about has apostrophe instead of the A. This is from his 1968 Second Sacred Concert. It's the title track and a classy Ellington melody. It's in an AABA form of 16-measure A sections and an 8-measure B section. The horn arrangement is nice here, with Harold finishing the phrase for the first A, Smoleon with some low answering lines on the repeat, and then tenor finishing the phrase the next time. Let's hear it get going. Nice arrangement. Harold gets the first solo, a nice sense of space, and he always connects things into a story. Armacost and Søren follow with relatively chilled solos matching the relaxed chug of rhythmic movement here. Foster gets a drum solo with nicely pitched toms, and it's punctuated by horn hits every 2 measures. Another really nice touch. Let's check out some of the drum solo. And back to the B section of the melody from there to the end. Track 5, Oscar T. Thelonious Monk tune from his 1964 recording Big Band and Quartet. Patitucci gets it started with some interesting solo bass to a pause. At about 45 seconds in, he gets it into tempo with a double-stopped sliding ostinato and some cymbals and hi-hat from Foster. Let's hear it from there into the static and then, surprisingly, playful horn arrangement. Søren solos from there, and then Tom Harrell is up. Patitucci returns to the double stopping sometimes underneath, and with no chordal instrument, he's really the man you want on bass. I like the open interval foghorn-like backing lines the saxes play under Harrell's solo, adding some Monkian mystery. Let's hear that. Armacost solos next, and Patitucci and Foster have some neat, tricky rhythmic change-ups underneath him. They vamp around the more static harmony phrase with some tasty fills from Foster to the final melody phrase. Track 6 is Vendetta from saxophonist Harold Land. I'm not sure if this was ever released on another recording, but you can find it on a 2021 release, Westward Bound. It's of unissued live recordings featuring Land and his group performing at Seattle's The Penthouse nightclub in 1962, 64, and 65. Harold's out on this one, and we've got just swinging and bopping saxes on this rhythm changes-based tune with a few twists and a final tag and into the start of a solo from Armacost. Let's hear this get going. And let's also check out some of Gary Smelyon's Barry solo on this one too, right from before where Patitucci lays out and leaves him just over the drums. I didn't think he was ever going to run out of ideas there. But Patitucci gets a go from there, and Foster gets some drum time before the saxes are back for another round of the melody and long note tag ending. And the recording ends up the way it started with another Armacost original, Disunited States. Just the saxes here too, and like the opening track from Armacost, this is really just a blues too, with a few twists. It's slow and loping with bass and drums taking a round to get it started. Let's have a listen from where the saxes join in with the melody. Armacost is just getting started there on a bluesy solo, taking his time to build things up. So let's come back in and hear a few more choruses from him. that's how you do it. Smoyan follows with a Barry solo, and Patitucci has a really fine bass solo here too, with Foster leaving him alone for a while on the way. The saxes do some trading fours with Foster before a final run through the melody. And that's the recording. Chordless jazz recordings are nothing new, but checking the new releases every day as I do, they're kind of in vogue these days again, with sax trios being the most common. Armacost has given us a special treat with this quintet recording, though. Adding Harold's trumpet to most of the tunes makes the horn arrangements really stand out here. He's contributed 2 original blues tunes and chosen some deep dive originals by jazz greats that work very well in this context. The recording is just over an hour long with only 7 tunes. That means that everyone gets to stretch out with improvised solos, and these are all top players who have more than enough ideas to keep going on and on. Harrell, Smoyan, and Armacost all have inspiring solos and get that extra freedom in the chordless format. Patitucci holds the harmonic fort with his rock-solid bass. Melodic solos are really nice too. And Foster's drums have a lot of tone, not just percussion. His playing is tasty with just the right restraint throughout. Thanks to Tim Armacost for putting this musical project on record for us to enjoy.
Yeah, well, not on CD apparently, unless it's on Bandcamp. I haven't really checked there. I was looking for this one right away. I'm always at a bit of a loss as to how to describe albums like this, because you have an all-star lineup that roots the music in traditional jazz. Yeah, you come up with interesting new approaches to it. These guys go off the beaten path a bit on this album. There are only 7 tracks, like you said. The lineup leave themselves a lot of space to solo in that space.
Yeah.
We say 7 tracks, but it's a long album. The compositions all come up sounding rather unique in their approach. I'm thinking of the raucous sound of the 3 solo instruments playing independently at the same time in the first track. It's really just the blues. And the quirkiness of the theme in Dance to the Lady, which leads to some interesting ideas in the individual solos. Now, Russ being a big fan of Tom Harrell, I try to zero in on him because Tom Harrell's presence makes me think of Russ anyway. He plays with a lot of restraint in his tone and reproach, yet always comes up with a supremely musical solo.
Yeah.
I feel like he's understated too, and it's really appealing. He gets a pretty big, spacious solo on Something About Believing that stayed in my mind. Tim Armacost is a little more outspoken, but he comes across as one of the ensemble rather than the album's star. And I guess that's inevitable when you have this kind of lineup. Patitucci's bass is always big and present, as it is here, and we're both big fans of Gary Smulyan from several past albums.
Right.
Here his rougher tone stands out, working well as a foil to Armacost, but he gets some great feeling solos in as well. Al Foster keeps the groove jazzy, and his various approaches both hard-hitting and lightly grooving when he has the opportunity to solo. So this is a more or less chilled-out album with some subtle ideas, as we should expect from this lineup. It's an album you can discover more of with each listen. It really is an album for, people who play jazz as well as people who really enjoy jazz. It's kind of subtle.
Yeah.
And I always like subtlety in music, so the subtlety's in the solos too, a lot of times.
Most of Armacost's recordings are like that. They're not really flashy. They're just based around really strong and deep musical ideas, and
Right.
He's a really good player.
Yeah. Wish this was on a CD, I just want to say,
I see it's on vinyl, but make it available on
vinyl,
CD
really?
too. Yeah, on vinyl, I think you only get 5 tracks though. So
Oh boy.
yeah, I'd buy this on a CD. Sure.
Yeah, me too.
That wraps up episode 177. As I said at the beginning, we're going to take a week off next week because I will be traveling internationally. Well, we're going to try to get you one more episode in August for the 26th, but no promises. It's going to depend on
we'll have to see.
a lot of things coming together. But you can always check us on our Facebook page. I'll put a message there if we're not able to pull that together, but we will try.
Yeah. I'd like to make the effort because I might be traveling one day too, and I do like the idea of being able to do the podcast from these remote, exotic locations around the globe.
Yeah.
It's my ultimate dream.
But I think as long as we can arrange to get a time together over the great Pacific Ocean, we'll get another episode out in August, because even though it's a little bit slowed down for classical and jazz releases, there are some bigger things coming up really soon that we want to talk about. Anyway, we're going to leave you hanging in suspense. We've both got 2 of 3 recordings kind of lined up, but that could change if we find something else before then to fill out the mix. So once we decide, I'll put up a playlist on Deezer. There'll be a link to it on our Facebook page as well. And hopefully we'll be back on August 26th with another episode. As always, we want to say thanks to Fast Signs of Staten Island for our glowing neon logo. Thanks for all of our listeners. We had the best month ever in July, and I don't know if we'll exceed that in August if we only get 3 episodes out, but we're growing and growing. So thanks to everyone for keeping on listening to all the episodes. Any final words tonight, Mike?
You know, I'm going to take the opportunity to tell everybody, since it's August and you're all going to the beach, you want to read a good book, read my novel, Extreme Music, available on Amazon.com, and it's self-published by me, by my Chocolate Mousse publishing company. That's Moose. It's just languishing there. Nobody knows it exists, so please read that. The author's name is Michael Vezzuto with a V. Okay, like victory. So check that out. It's a good summer read. It's funny.
Yeah, all musical-minded people, and anyone who's ever been to a music school or conservatory will appreciate that.
Thank you very much. And I want to say bon voyage to my friend, Russ.
Hopefully we'll be speaking to you from the other side in our next episode. All right. Well, that wraps it up for episode 177, and we'll be back in a couple weeks with 178. So until then, keep listening, and we'll see you again next time.